Edgar Mitchell, former astronaut who walked on the Moon in 1971 during Apollo 14, has since become a major public advocate in the growing worldwide UFO movement. He speaks at UFO conventions all over the world. In a 1998 London Times News article, Mitchell is described as believing that aliens have landed on the Earth, and he has intensified his campaign to persuade Washington to acknowledge life beyond our skies. Mitchell argues that life is almost certain to exist on any other planet with a supportive environment. Some physicists, he points out, now believe it is possible to actually travel faster than the speed of light. He is 90% certain that many of the thousands of UFOs recorded since the 1940s belong to visitors from another planet. Although some have been delusions and others natural phenomena, too many remain unexplained, he said. This suggests there are humanoids manning craft which have characteristics not in the arsenal of any nation on Earth that we know of. This is very alarming, he said. Edgar Mitchell holds a PhD from MIT and stands to be a perfect candidate in this particular NASA UFO investigation. Mitchell says his research, including conversations with people who have worked in intelligence agencies and military groups, have convinced him that the American government has covered up the truth about UFOs for 50 years. I thought if I sent Edgar Mitchell the tether footage from STS-75 that he could clearly see that we were looking at the largest UFOs ever captured on film. I wrote Apollo 14 astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell in October of 1999. On November 24, 1999, Edgar Mitchell wrote me the following letter. David Sereeda, yes, I have received your film and reviewed it and the info package you provided. I see utterly nothing about the tethered incident that is particularly interesting. If there is more revealing footage, then I will look at it. However, I have looked at many feet of space film and have yet to see only one that has anything worth looking into regarding UFO appearances. Signed, Edgar Mitchell. I could not accept the idea that such a great proponent of UFOs was so adamantly against the suggestion that these giant circles passing behind the tethered satellite were UFOs. He was shrugging off the most astounding piece of video ever witnessed of UFOs in the history of the space program. I couldn't believe it. Dr. Mitchell, who was an MIT PhD, could not even acknowledge that the discs were clearly going behind the 12-mile length of the tether. He couldn't even see that very simple fact. I think just about any moron can tell the difference between when a disc is going behind this piece of wood and when it's going in front of it. That's in front, that is behind. This is not in front, this is behind. And that's exactly how they appear. Why couldn't Edgar Mitchell see this point? I decided to try to argue the points with Mitchell more precisely. He wrote me back almost immediately. David, at first glance they are just particles, perhaps outgassed. I do not know. But I certainly would look for a more prosaic explanation than UFOs. If you have a better film, I will look at it, but I am not very optimistic that they are anything exotic. Signed, Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell wrote to me that he thought the objects were just particles, perhaps outgassed from the space shuttle. How does a particle appear to be visible from over 77 miles away? We're looking, the cameras on the space shuttle are at least 77 miles away and drifting past 100 miles. How do you see just little particles of dust floating by that appear as perfect giant circles with notches cut out of the side, clearly passing behind the tether, pulsing with very sophisticated wave patterns? How do particles behave like this? Maybe I have to relearn and reinvestigate particle theory to understand some of these ideas, these ridiculous ideas that some of these scientists are coming up with. He wrote me back the following letter on December 3rd, 1999. David Sereeda, I remain open-minded, but I saw nothing on the tape you sent that had sharply defined edges in the vicinity of or passing behind the tether. Also in the footage of the tether, the commentator on the spacecraft is making a running commentary. For really anything of significance in space around the tether at that time, don't you think they would have been saying something about it? If they were as big as you say, they would have been visible to the naked eye and surely reported, not ignored as seems to be the case. You comment about no infrared images. Of course not. If nothing is there, how could there be an infrared image? Signed, Edgar Mitchell. The first point that Dr. Mitchell makes here is that I saw nothing on the tape that had sharply defined edges in the vicinity of or passing behind the tether, reveals that he is ignoring just how defined the edges of these huge discs are and how sharply defined they are as they travel behind the very clear edges of the tether. More precisely about the tether, we remember the Huntsville, Alabama NASA operator asking the crew,
"And how wide does that tether appear to be?" It seems to resemble a much wider strand than we'd expect. Can you describe which way the satellite is visible on that strand?
The 12-mile-long tether cable was only 1/10 of a centimeter in thickness and should not have been visible from over 77 miles away. There was no answer to why it appeared so thick because the shuttle astronauts did not know the answer then. But on Wednesday, February 28, 1996, of the NASA STS-75 Day 7 highlights, they recorded the very reasons as the scientists report that they can measure sunlight-induced electrical charge on the tether and satellite as it moves through the daylight and night portions of its orbit around the Earth. Because the tether was charged with energy constantly by the highly charged particles in space and from the ionosphere, it produced a magnetic field around it which became sunlit and very visible. But also the report revealed that nitrogen gas from the satellite had been emptied and the gas would have become ionized, which could have produced a neon tube-like effect. This all explained precisely why the tether appeared so thick from so far away. It had nothing to do with the glare or out-of-focus theories.
Claude is trying to do a quick, good job here adjusting the cameras.
Copy that.
Satellite now 100 nautical miles.
Charlie, completely unzoomed, and you see the full extent of the tether. I tried to adjust the focus, but I can't get better than that.
Okay, Claude. Thank you.
I'm going to zoom in now.
So precisely, the UFOs can be seen passing behind the thickness of the tether's sunlight-induced electrical charge and ionized gas. The light shining off of the tether and the energized field obscures the light shining from the UFOs precisely because the UFOs are passing behind the tethered satellite. These are all facts that Dr. Mitchell was unaware of.
This view showing the satellite.
Dr. Mitchell was obviously not considering the NASA astronauts talking about the UFOs on alternate Department of Defense encrypted radio channels, probably because they did not have them during his own Apollo 14 mission to the moon. During long pauses between words, we might assume that the astronauts and NASA control operators are talking on Department of Defense secure channels encrypted to prevent anyone from tapping into their conversations about classified information, such as unidentified flying objects. When Dr. Mitchell finished by saying, "You comment on no infrared image," of course not. If nothing is there, how could there be an infrared image? Dr. Mitchell was obviously completely unaware of how objects that are vibrating with electromagnetic energy higher in frequency than the human eye can see, such as the near ultraviolet range of light, can actually exist but be undetectable in the visible and infrared ranges of light. Perhaps such observations required advanced ideas in quantum physics that he was not prepared to accept at the time. On February 18, 1999, I received the following letter from Dr. Joseph Newth III. Dear Mr. Sereeda, I did look carefully at the video you sent, and I really must apologize to you for not replying sooner. The objects that were on the video appear to me to be floating debris from the cargo bay of the space shuttle. These objects often appeared to be fuzzy because they got quite close to the camera and were often out of focus. End quote. The test that you just saw, I showed the video camera here on a tripod, and I held a set of keys only 4 or 5 inches away from the camera, and you could see that they were very in focus. In the background, somewhere around 100 feet away, was the tree that you saw. The point that Dr. Knuth makes about the video cameras on the space shuttle, that objects as they got close to the camera appeared very fuzzy and became out of focus, and some disappearing altogether, doesn't seem to really hold up here, because video cameras don't actually work the same way optical cameras do. A regular 35 millimeter camera, as you're focused on a distant object, as objects come close to the camera, they get very fuzzy. In fact, they can disappear altogether. But it's not the case with video cameras that have CCD imaging chips inside of them that actually process the images in a very different way than 35 millimeter cameras do. We have to assume, and from studies I've made into the video cameras used on the space shuttle, that they're very high-tech, very high-quality cameras. Many of them are off-the-shelf cameras, but they're retrofitted with more advanced chips inside of them, and also image intensifiers and special filters. So the camera that we just did the test on was a very high-tech camera, but certainly you can imagine that what they're using on the space shuttle is even better. So why, in this scene that we just did, do a pair of keys appear so crisp and so sharp and in focus at the same time we're focused on a very, very distant object? It seems to defy the explanations and reasoning Dr. Knuth gave as to what we were seeing on the tape. James Oberg came up with excuses about what we were seeing. He couldn't acknowledge that the objects were going behind the tether. He just ignored the facts, the simple facts. He tried to say that what we were seeing was an optical illusion produced by the CCD in the video camera. He's trying to say that as these objects came near to the camera and they got close, they produced this fuzzy orb called an airy disk. When an object gets too close to a video camera or to a lens in a 35 millimeter camera, for example, it just basically produces a very fuzzy and very soft light. It's very translucent and in some cases barely even detectable. They basically look like this. Sometimes they have a little black hole in the middle, just like our alleged UFOs do, and you get a very fuzzy kind of cloudy light around them. But all of the light is out of focus. So I can understand how he could make an assumption like that. But also with an airy disk phenomena, you would also never get a clear, very distinct line. When we see the UFOs going behind the tether, the line and the crispness on the line on the tether is so straight and so perfect, suggesting again that everything is in focus. When I demonstrated the test on the camera earlier, where we passed a set of keys very close, within 4 or 5 inches of the camera, while the camera was focused at an object far in the distance, we noticed that the keys were very much in focus. There was no airy disk around the keys. We didn't get an effect like this. We had keys that were perfectly in focus while the tree in the background was also in focus. So what was James Oberg trying to tell me? In the year 2000, I did a lot of investigations with different scientists all over the world. I got contacted by an astronomer, actually the head astronomer of the Canberra Observatory in Australia, Claire Williams. She had already seen the tether footage. She had already seen the STS-75 tether footage. She didn't have a very good copy of it, and we got into a furious debate about airy disks. She felt that what we were seeing on the tape in the tether were just airy disks. Airy disks are when you have like a star or a pinpoint light source, and the camera lens goes way out of focus. It produces something very similar to the UFOs that we've seen on the tape. You see a very soft black hole in the middle and a very translucent disk around the pinpoint light source. So what happens is the light becomes so diffused in the lens because it's so out of focus that we get this phenomena called airy disks. And when many people would look at this, they would say, oh, that looks a lot like the UFOs we've seen on the tape. And I understand how Claire Williams came to these conclusions. But there's no way that an airy disk could appear to pass behind. And remember, in the tether incident, we had the tether, which is over 77 to 100 miles away, and we saw the disk going behind it. They were not going in front of it. Once the camera lens is completely out of focus on a light source, all the light is out of focus. So you would have there's no way you would get a sharp line on the tether and then you'd get an airy disk separate from that. and if the two fused together, you would just get a lot of blurry light. When we did the test earlier with the video camera similar to the quality they're using on the space shuttle, in fact, the cameras on the space shuttle are much better quality than the camera we did this test on. We held a pair of keys only 4 or 5 inches in front of the camera, while the camera was focused on a tree 100 or 200 feet away. Both were in perfect focus. That's because the depth of field of the actual camera, if this is the camera here, the video camera here, and the light is coming into it, what is known as depth of field is when a lens focuses on an object. Say we focus on this CD right here, this compact disc right here. Basically, once we're in focus on this object on a regular camera, from that point on, you have something called depth of field. Meaning, if you focus on this point, as objects get further and further behind it, depending on the aperture of the lens of the camera, a smaller aperture gives you greater depth of field. Objects start to fall out of focus as they get further and further away. The same thing happens when you're focused with a regular camera on something far away, like the tether. The tether was 77 miles away and drifting into 100, and then something came close to the camera, very close. It would actually just appear as a very soft blur of light, which is what an airy disk is. Depending on how bright the object was, you might get a little bit of a brighter disk. But again, these disks, and you'll see some footage of them from the space shuttle of what real airy disks look like, they're very distorted, very, very out of focus. You don't get details when a camera goes that far out of focus. Now, the video camera is very different than a normal camera. The video camera doesn't have a film plane. It has sensors called CCDs. The CCDs in modern video cameras, such as those used on the space shuttle in the 1990s, are very similar to the cameras that we did the test on, with the pair of keys and the tree in the background. With CCDs, as objects come close to the lens, while the camera is focused on a distant object, you get phenomenal depth of field, meaning the object coming close to the camera, in this case the keys were only 4 inches away from the camera, were perfectly in focus. At the same time, the tree was also in focus. So you could not possibly get an airy disk with a camera like this. You would have to turn all of the camera's light out of focus to get an airy disk. And in this case, we know the tether was in focus, and therefore anything coming near the camera should produce a very crisp image. So Clara Williams' theory in regards to airy disks didn't make sense to me.
Across the Atlantic Ocean over Africa.
The image we are seeing now shows what are true airy disks. This happens because the light reflecting off of a number of very bright objects is totally out of focus. The shuttle's cameras here are way out of focus, so we notice that we cannot make any distinctions about what we are seeing with clear features. But if we watch very closely, we can see that the space shuttle's video camera is going further and further out of focus very quickly, precisely as a large, brightly glowing object, which is pulsing, traveling on a 45-degree plane from left to top right and out of frame. Could the camera operator have intentionally moved the camera out of focus to avoid capturing this unidentified flying object as it flew by at close range to the shuttle during a live NASA broadcast? We can barely identify this amazing object so similar to the disc-shaped UFOs seen during the tether incident. In the test demonstrated, the only case this can happen using the shuttle's video cameras is when the camera lens is put far out of focus. When the video camera lens is in focus on a distant object, such as the tethered satellite 77 to 100 miles away, objects coming near the camera lens do not go out of focus. Therefore, they simply cannot produce airy disks. Also, more precisely, an airy disk cannot appear to pass behind an object 77 to 100 miles away, such as the tethered satellite, or any distance away, because they only appear when the lens is far out of focus. And when the lens is out of focus, we cannot make any distinctions about what we are seeing. Also, when you consider the number of things that look like this, in this case we have a CD, a compact disc, we all know what these are now. They look very similar, but they're not the same thing. A tire also has a hole in the middle, and it's wheel-shaped. UFOs are classically disc-shaped. This is what they normally look like. So because things look similar, we can't make the mistake of assuming that they're all the same thing because they look like they're the same thing. So anyway, in this debate, Clara Williams absolutely would not concede that what we were seeing were UFOs. But she did admit to me that she's mystified by this subject because she herself has actually seen UFOs.
A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. Max Planck, the godfather of quantum physics.
Why was this investigation on NASA UFOs moving into quantum physics? Because without some basic understanding of magnetism, gravity, and light integrated into quantum ideas, the next observations about the UFOs would be impossible to comprehend. We were about to study phenomena that only quantum physics could explain. On the night of January the 10th, 2000, a giant new theory in quantum physics exploded into my mind with crystal clarity. The theory would prove that gravity is gradient in frequencies that eventually, at higher frequencies, would go far beyond light speed, and that those higher frequencies of gravity would conquer the vast diameter of our own galaxy, 100,000 light years, in 1 second and then in 0 time. Eventually, the theory would show how the highest frequencies of gravity could conquer the distance of the entire universe in 0 time. Thus, gravity at this highest frequency would be the only force that is truly beyond space and time. A brand new theory in quantum physics exploded into my mind with crystal clarity. The theory would prove that eventually electromagnetism and gravity waves would go far beyond the speed of light, eventually conquering the vast distances of space in 0 time. It seemed like an impossible theory. Einstein said that nothing can move faster than the speed of light. Nikola Tesla, who preceded Einstein, the inventor of the alternating current generators, radio, and over 100 other U.S. patents, said that energy waves were vibrating many times faster than the speed of light in the higher ethers, and that eventually those waves slowed down to what we now know the electromagnetic spectrum and became visible light waves. He did experiments that actually proved his hypothesis, but his theories were ignored as the world was heralding Einstein as a great genius. Einstein put the limit on us of light speed, and there was just no way in my mind I could accept the idea that extraterrestrial civilizations would travel as slow as light speed from 4.3 light years away from Earth, Alpha Centauri A and B, and Sirius A and B stars 8.7 light years from Earth. That was too long to take a trip to go find out who your neighbors were. There must be something called beyond light speed, and it must actually exist, and these UFOs must be utilizing energy technologies and propulsion systems that allow them to break the speed of light. Before I actually looked at the waves that were pulsating from the UFOs, I actually had this new theory in physics. And the theory doesn't go against traditional wave theory. It's a new way of looking at waves in a way that is not contradictory at all to the formations of our own galaxy and our own universe. Traditionally, waves, as we saw before, were looked at on their side, and as they oscillated faster and faster and faster per second, we saw an increase in energy. It was Max Planck, the godfather of quantum physics, who said, and I quoted him earlier, that energy was equal to the frequency of the oscillation of a wave. The H really stands for 1 hertz. So 1 Hertzian wave, one oscillation of a wave represented 1 hertz. Later, the H in Planck's formula became known as Planck's constant, which became identified as a quanta of photons. But actually, Max Planck didn't really believe in photons. He believed in waves. It was Einstein who came along later criticizing Max Planck and saying that really there were photons, there were mass particles. And we discussed earlier how we went from E equals hf as the main theory in physics to E equals mc squared, mass times the speed of light squared. So today, both theories are actually respected, and more people are leaning towards observations in quantum mechanics, in quantum energy. What I'm about to show you is an absolute breakthrough in wave theory. It will appear very simple as I explain it, but in the outcome, you'll see how we actually break the speed of light. I call the theory gravity beyond light speed theory because looking into the core of a galaxy, looking at a galaxy, I finally understood what was going on. If a galaxy was working perfectly and created the largest amounts of energy in existence known to science, then there must be something about the galaxy that could reveal to us how we could reach these tremendous levels of energy required to go beyond the speed of light. So looking at a galaxy, I felt I understood it for the first time. So what I did is I built what's called a galaxy clock. I'm not actually creating a galaxy, I'm creating the energy that actually created the galaxy itself, and I'm going to show you how that all works and how that relates to going beyond the speed of light. So the first thing I've done is I've used the distance that light travels per second as 1 inch on the galaxy clock. Light travels 186,282 miles every second. It's constant. It never changes. It doesn't slow down and then speed up. So because that's a constant, I can use that as a mark on my clock. So every second on each of these wheels spiraling further and further inwards, the galaxy makes in 1 second, each wheel goes one distance of the speed of light. So this distance from here to here is equal to here. So we're going to actually see the movement of electromagnetism, which is what light is, as it moves through these concentric wheels in the galaxy clock. This line here represents gravity, force, space, and time, which is actually the distance between the center of my clock and the outermost wheel in a much greater distance. And that actually represents a force called gravity that we'll actually see growing as we move through the clock. So what I'm going to do now is, as I've already counted 12 points on the galaxy clock, I'm going to connect all of the relative lines into each concentric wheel, and you're going to start to see what's actually happening in the clock. We're going to see that second number 1, this happened. We went from this line to this line. We don't really see much change yet. In the second, connecting each line, we can start to see a little bit of a curvature happening in the second line. And the third second, we can see the clock is starting to curve. Space and time is actually starting to curve. The oscillations per second are starting to increase as we move closer to the center of the clock, as we move through time. The 4th second, we can really see things starting to change now. The 5th second, and the 6th second. So far, in 6 seconds on the galaxy clock, we've made a half an oscillation in the innermost wheel, and we've made a very insignificant amount of oscillations in the outermost wheel. So as electromagnetism starts to spiral inwards on each concentric wheel, as we move inwards, we can see an increase in the oscillations of the waves. One oscillation of a wave would represent 1 hertz, or 1 hertz in the formula of Max Planck. Energy is equal to the frequency of the oscillation of a wave. So we're seeing an increase in the oscillations of waves. Therefore, we should see an increase in energy, because as wave oscillates more times per second, we'll actually see energy increasing according to Planck's formula. We saw the same thing happening in the electromagnetic spectrum. The faster waves oscillated per second, the more energy they produced. We're going to learn how that energy is produced in a moment, but let's go another 6 counts on the galaxy clock. The 7th second. The 8th second. At the 8-second point, we're actually going almost 2 times the speed of light, according to my theory. We've touched the gravity, force, space, and time line here, and in the same second we've crossed the speed of light twice. The distance that light travels per second is this distance, but we've gone through 2 of them in 1 second. So at this point in the galaxy clock, I detect that there's so much energy present that photons, mass, are starting to accelerate beyond the speed of light. So here we've gone 2 times the speed of light. The 8th second. the 9th second actually. Here we've touched the wheel and we've gone just a little bit past 2 times the speed of light, the 10th second. All the way to here, we've almost gone 2.5 times the speed of light on the 10th second in the innermost wheel, the 11th second. Three times the speed of light in the innermost wheel, and the 12th second. All the way to 12. So at this point, we can start to see the formation and the beginning of what looks like, at the 12 count position here, the spiral arm of a galaxy. We can actually see the beginnings of the creation of our own galaxy. Our own galaxy is created by this principle. By this theory, I'm actually showing what is actually happening in our galaxy, how energy is moving, and how creation is happening. The oscillations per second here are 1. 1 oscillation per second here, and not even, if we reached here on the outermost wheel, we would be at 1/4 of an oscillation in the outermost wheel. So the theory is demonstrating that as electromagnetic energy, light, starts to spiral inwards on smaller and smaller orbits, we see an increase in the oscillations per second, and therefore an increase in energy. And as energy increases, it starts to affect particles. It starts to affect mass. Just as Dr. Earl